Welcome to Bible Theory. This is our second episode, and today we're going to be talking about the history of language and the true history of the Tower of Babel, and how it relates to our modern world and where we can find evidence to prove that it truly existed and what it might have looked like. So first I want to talk about what the Tower of Babel may have looked like. So, think about purpose. What was it built for? It was built to reach God. It was built out of pride, the original sin. First sin to ever happen. All sins are done out of pride, in a way. Secondly, I believe it was built to escape the flood. The flood after it happened, another flood. I believe ancient people remembered the flood or were aware of it and said, hey, Noah's descendants could have been thinking about how they need to escape a flood if there's a second one. They probably forgot the fact that God used a rainbow to promise as a reminder. The definition of the rainbow has changed drastically within recent times, and it's disgusting, but the rainbow originally meant peace between God and man, and apparently they forgot about that. So they must have forgotten what the rainbow meant, just as we have today. So beside that, they probably built it to escape a flood. Now, escaping the flood is impossible, but again, they forgot what the rainbow meant. They probably forgot how powerful God is as well, which is sad, but it's probably what happened. So, they build this to escape a flood. What would it have looked like building this out of pride to reach heaven and say, hey God, you're not gonna kill me with a flood? Well, think about Satan, Lucifer. He was the most beautiful angel, leader of the worshippers of angels. Most beautiful angel, out of pride, probably looks good on the outside. So I believe the Tower of Babel may have been built to be magnificent, beautiful, but it was built out of pride and never ended up reaching anything close to what they were trying to do. Now, they never would have been able to reach God anyways, because we understand here at Bible Theory that, heaven, God exists within a different realm than us, a different dimension. God exists outside of time, which suggests that he lives in a different dimension where things like math is the language of the universe, not where God lives, probably not. Time, same thing. Things we can't mentally comprehend yet with our brains, limiting our ability to think. But it's beside the point. That said, they just were not aware of all the factors that we're considering here at Bible Theory. So, it probably looked really good, beautiful, and was probably pretty tall. Of course, the base would need to be bigger than the bottom because they were probably trying to, build pretty high up. I believe the Tower of Babel was the original archetype, for a pyramid or a ziggurat. The pyramids of Giza, all right? I don't think they were the Tower of Babel. I believe it was built somewhere around Turkey, modern-day Turkey. Of course, it was something before that Ottoman Empire, I believe it was, that named it Turkey, if I remember correctly. But that happens, long after the Tower of Babel was built. So the Tower of Babel probably looked like the first pyramid to ever be built. Probably, we don't think it was never, completed. So I believe that people couldn't communicate anymore, and we know that from the Bible. The Bible tells us that languages were created, which makes a heck of a lot more sense than what evolutionists, materialists tell us. People had languages, and then kind of spontaneously people just kind of created more languages, and it just doesn't add up. It doesn't track. Not factually. God-inspiring languages, although God cannot be comprehended, which is where a lot of people get hung up. Also, Jesus gets people hung up kind of morally, unfortunately. But both of those things are people use against Christianity. They're like, God inspiring a language, heck nah. I believe we created our own languages. That's prideful, of course. Pride, again, shows up a lot in our lives. So, people move and continue to build Tower of Babel, their own towers, to escape the flood. That's why we see them in South America, Egypt. I know there are other examples, but, Americas and the Middle East and Africa, whatever. Like, Egypt is technically in Africa. I believe there were some maybe in China. I believe Asia has some ziggurats as well. So that said, I believe a ziggurat specifically is what the Tower of Babel would have looked like. maybe some Nephilim built them, or giants, we could say more specifically, considering this is after the flood, there were a lot less giants. But that said, we know that it probably looked like a ziggurat. It's not confirmed, but I think that is the most likely scenario. I know there's a famous drawing I've seen a lot of a literal tower that's circular, and then each layer gets smaller. There's a staircase going around the outside. I don't think that is it, because I think that's just too modern. I think a ziggurat is simple and effective building method where we see a lot of stuff going on. Of course, some of them had most likely sacrifices. What do you think they were sacrificing for up there? Probably to prevent a flood. I wouldn't be surprised if they were not worshiping the same God exactly, because things change over time. People forget things. Truth gets twisted a lot of the time. The Israelites were the one who held the truth for the longest time. Of course, the Greeks also worshiped God. Paul talks about this, worshiping the unknown God that would have been the one true God. But Greeks, it's a little bit different. I actually have a friend who believes in Greek religion. I brought that up to him, and he didn't really respond to it. But, I mean, whatever. I thought I'd bring that up. It was kind of cool what Paul said about that. There's a little song about it by a band named Theocracy. Pretty cool. You should listen to it. It's called Altar to the Unknown God. Anyways, that's besides the point. Truth is, I believe it looked like a ziggurat. Well, now I'm here to ask the final question of this episode. How does the Tower of Babel relate to us directly, ourselves? Well, number one, in a way, it set up the world entirely how it is. The Tower of Babel is what caused people to travel to places like, so the natives to the Americas, the natives to Australia, and other places, of course, in Asia, probably leaving from the Middle East, most likely somewhere around there. That sets up our complete existence. People, our ancestors, wouldn't have met each other otherwise. There would have been more unity within the world if that didn't happen. Plus, it's a prime example of what we can do with our lives. Sometimes we like to think of ourselves as better than God, and we don't even always realize it. Sometimes we think we're trying to obtain our own relationship with God ourselves and trying to obtain salvation ourselves without any help from God. When in reality, we need that outside help from God to have righteousness, because we can't do it on our own. With God living within us, He guides us through it. And we need that. We need that to survive these things. So I'm simply trying to say that the Tower of Babel not only historically directly relates to us and pretty much inspired our creation, but it also has a spirit, the spirit of Babylon. I'm not saying that Babel, the Tower of Babel, was Babylonian, because I don't really think it was, but it could have been, and it has that same spirit. Rebellion, pride, and some other things that Babylon practiced, like sacrifice of babies, which is still practiced today, and a lot of other sins that, idols and plenty of things. Now, we don't know everything that was going on with the people building the Tower of Babel, but we do know one thing for certain, that it was built out of pride, just like everything about Babylon. Babylon itself is a spirit. It is an example of what we ourselves can become when we exalt ourselves over God. And with sin being something that no one is afraid to be open about, that makes Christianity all the more different, and all the more controversial, which means that if you're a Christian, you're a Christian. Now, there are certain churches that do allow, sin within them in a way that I do not support and don't like. But those are false preachers. Those are not true churches. Those are liars and agents of Satan. All that said, Babel relates to us in a spiritual way and a physical way. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video. Peace.